Hi, I'm Drew Hutchison. You're tuned to Local Bias. We come to you from the studios of Greenfield Community Television at 393 Main Street in beautiful downtown Greenfield. My guest today is Brice Wilson, who is a Greenfield resident and has some provocative story. I find them provocative. When we first met, somehow we started talking about near-death experiences. Oh, Brice, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
This is more fun.
Thank you.
But so we were talking about near-death experiences.
Right.
You had a near-death experience.
Yes.
So tell me about that, or tell the viewers. But I'm curious to hear more about it.
All right. Well, let's see how I can put this concisely. I was 20. I had been drafted into the military the last year of the draft, and I got ill during the early stages of training and went into emergency surgery eventually because the doctors I had been seeing had misdiagnosed or ignored the symptoms, and so it was considered very severe, and they didn't really expect me to come out of the anesthesia. And I don't know how long I was actually clinically dead. Couldn't have been too long, but I was away from the body for an Earth time about 16 hours.
Wow. And
there was a nurse waiting for me next to the bed when I woke, which was somewhere around, well, it was very dark in the early morning, and she sounded quick intake when I moved, and so I realized later I wasn't expected to do that. And then I resumed physical life.
Did you have a sense of, do you have the remembrance of going back into the body or looking down at your body and seeing it, or?
Well, yeah, I was telling you first what it was like for me as a physical organism. What happened, I was told to count backwards from 100, and I hit like 99 or 8, and I was out.
Okay, so when they were putting you under anesthesia initially, right. That's how they, okay.
And then I came back into consciousness much more quickly than I expected, which you do anyway when you're under anesthesia. But in this case, I came back and I was observing the body below me and the surge team around the body working on it. And it was all sort of hazy and translucent, I would say. But I could see things, I could hear things, I could hear the surgical team talking to each other. I could hear a radio playing some kind of country western bullshit. And then it took me it's fascinating at first, and then I said, Jesus, I'm dead. Mm-hmm. And that freaked me out. And the next thing I remember actually perceiving was the roof of the hospital. And I was still rising, and pretty soon I could see the entire training base in Illinois, the wintering cornfields that were surrounding it. And pretty soon that was out of sight, and I could just see the curvature of the planet. And it was just after dawn at that point, but I felt myself being drawn to the west, so it was dark again. And pretty soon I was just out in space. And I was a mixture of emotions. Some of them were, on one hand, I was really pissed off that I'd spent 20 years in this body, and now it was shot, and it seemed like to me that it was the cause of it was the misdiagnosis, which was repeated over a period of weeks. And on the other hand, I was just glad to get out, because even before that, things had been, to me, very uncomfortable and manipulative and I just didn't really have any sense of wanting to be on Earth anymore anyway.
Well, who wants to be drafted to go to the Vietnam War right when the war is, I mean, you were the last draft class.
That's right, yeah. Yeah. And I had read the Pentagon Papers.
Okay.
So I knew the war was bullshit.
And actually, there's a connection with Franklin County and the Pentagon Papers, because Randy Keeler is the person who persuaded Ellsberg to release the Pentagon Papers.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, it's a small world.
Yeah.
But now, a lot of times when people have near-death experiences, from what I've read, because I've always been interested in this topic, is that they communicate with other spirits. Did that happen?
I'm getting to that.
Oh, okay.
I'm getting to that. So I continued rising, glad, and I kind of turned my attention away from Earth and just was moving out into space, kind of curious, like what's going to happen now? And then I started slowing down and I stopped. And I seemed to be bouncing off some kind of field, or I couldn't see it, but something was preventing me from going any further. And I tried going around it, but that didn't work. I mean, I'd go in any direction I wanted inside this thing, but not outside. It just kept coming back, kind of gently floating back. And after giving up on that, I just kind of turned around with my back against the seeming boundary and looking down at Earth and stewing over. And that's when the lifetime itself sort of started to unreel. I'm looking at what happened in the life, and not with a whole lot of pleasure. And it faded out for a little while, as though I was sleeping, because I didn't know what to do. And then came back, and there I am again, and kind of bobbing like this. And I heard a little voice, or I got this little impression, or something like that from somewhere, that said, "Look at the boundary. Look at what's keeping you from going forward." And so I, look, there's nothing there.
Right.
It's invisible. That didn't seem like very helpful prompt or cue. And I then began again processing the lifetime and realized that, I got this other impression that the thing that was holding me back was the negative emotions I had about what I'd experienced. And that if I really wanted to go, I had to let go of all that. All the anger, all the, the sense of recrimination, or wanting to prove something, just let all that go. And that wasn't easy. But I did it, apparently, because the next thing I knew, I was out of that scene. And now I'm in another scene, way out in space, it seemed like. And it was, there were other beings around me who were like me, in the same sense that I just felt like I was kind of a ball of energy. Mm-hmm. And there were others around me, but none of them were approaching me. They all seemed to be locked into some sort of trance with some kind of support that allowed them to be down in that earthly experience the same one I had been down in. And we were all participating in this thing, this game or something that we were pretending to be these meat bodies that were mortal and go through this process of living. And I said, well, I couldn't actually remember agreeing to this or getting involved in this, but whatever the reason was, as far as I was concerned, it was horseshit. I was out of there. I didn't want to go back, and I realized I didn't have to. I was going to take off. So I had a sense of detaching from whatever things I was plugged into to allow this experience, and was moving away quietly so as not to disturb any of the other, what seemed like dreamers. Mm-hmm. They were dreaming. And as I was drifting away, one of the other dreamers seemed to rouse and detach and was standing or hovering in front of me. And I went, well, what's this about? And then there was a communication that was more like a mind meld, where there was an exchange, and I had a sense that there's this being and I, and the being was like, where are you going? You know, kind of thing. And I said, away. And they said, you don't remember. And I said, well, that's as far as I got, because now I'm remembering, because this connection was like, oh, we'd agreed to do this thing. And then I also recognized the being, but only vaguely. I didn't have a clear recall of, but I knew this being. Mm-hmm. I knew this being, and I knew that I knew that being, and I loved it. I didn't want to disturb its trajectory in any sense. But now I'm curious. I'm thinking, where do I know this being from? Now I'm spooling back to this last lifetime, thinking, I don't remember any contact with this being. And then it hit me again from the being that we did have track or experience together in this lifetime. It just elapsed, but it just hadn't happened yet. Oh. It was further on in the script. Mm. And that it was going to happen, but it hadn't happened yet. And the track itself was laid out, and I could see that there were things that were going to happen, and there were things that already happened, and they were scripted. And what wasn't scripted was my response, how I dealt with it. And the experience I just had with the surgery going the way it had gone was part of that script. And that it involved my having decided to go through this in order to become aware of my identity as a non-material being who was having this experience as a meat body and a...
It was a pretty risky wake-up call.
Yeah. Well, one of my teachers later on said, yeah, the really stupid ones have to die. So I saw it, and I saw that, okay, I realize now I still don't have to go back, but I realized that this actually was part of what I had intended to do this lifetime was become aware of what I really was. Mm. And to somehow negotiate a way to function effectively in this world through this meat body. And in order to do that, I had to make friends with it. Mm. Because the meat bodies are terrified, usually, right, of contact with
ghosts. They have their own consciousness.
Yes. And they often don't get along.
Well, why? In fact, people have so much inner conflict, and because there truly is inner conflict. And I think part of it is that our spiritual side, the light being that we are, that message from the light beings has been twisted in a way by the world, so that we have these ideas of how our meat body should behave based upon some kind of spiritual laws, but it has nothing to do with spirit. We don't allow ourselves to actually have the human animal experience as well as the human spiritual experience. And, and that separation, of course, causes a lot of repression in society, and then it manifests in aberrant behavior. So it's not smart, but it's how it is.
Yep, that's what we deal with. So I said, okay, now I remember, and next thing I know, I'm back. And most of that experience faded pretty quick, because I think largely because I was now it's almost like being reborn. Mm-hmm. I'm feeling, what is this thing that I'm in and working with and can move a little bit, and why it hurt so much, and I got jabbed with a needle and I go under, and I was there for several weeks recovering. But I had dreams, and in the dreams it all came back over time. And as I think I mentioned to you before, I also started having experiences outside the body again. And it was as if the doorway between these two realms didn't quite close.
Right.
And so I was having more experiences outside. And also, there were things from the other side that were coming through the door to, hello, look over here, look over there. I'm going to take you on a trip. I'm going to take you over here and there. And that terrified my body.
Oh.
Now I realize it's my body. I didn't realize it was my body. I still thought of it as me.
Right.
Like, oh, I'm scared. How can I stop this from happening? Well, should I go tell the doctors? No. I said my father works in the VA in a psych ward. I don't want any part of that.
Right.
And so what should I do? So I decided, well, I'll drink. That didn't work. It just made it worse.
I'm glad you figured that out pretty fast.
Yeah. And then I got the guidance that I realized that I was supposed to get. That's one of the things that I heard just before I came back, was that you will be helped. You're not in here alone. You're going to run into this other being, and you're going to run into other beings, and people are going to show up, and they're going to give you maps and books and things that will help you orient into this reality, or this dual reality. And that started happening, and then I just accepted that this is, it's scary at times, and a lot of the experiences were,
but you also learn that when you face those fears, and the animal part of you learns too, it's like you face those fears, all of a sudden it's not such a big deal. So
Right.
much of it we build up in our imaginations. And not only does our sense consciousness or the animal self have an imagination and its own entity in a way that cohabitates with us. It's our partner, but it's at a different intellectual level, because it doesn't need to have our minds. It needs to have the mind for the world.
Right.
So I studied actually, so these levels of consciousness that you're discussing, I studied with Dr. Rosita Rodriguez and May Ristich at the Renaissance Center in Gill for years, talking about how to even determine which voice are you listening to in your head, because we contain multitudes. And I can see why people have issues, because it's a very messed up, this whole thing.
Yeah.
I mean, what is reality? I mean, we create it for the most part.
Right.
I mean, our minds are predictors. It's always figuring out, well, what's going to happen next, so that the world is safe for me. I want homeostasis. I want to know that everything's sticks this way, and of course, it never stays that way, and it's never even that way if you think it is.
Right.
It's just a glimmer of something, and so we make our best guesses, and they're kind of superstitious at times.
Yeah. What else do we have to go by?
That's right. And because how much does science understand this? How do they measure your experience?
Well, they never got the chance.
Right. Right.
But there are scientists, and have been scientists all along, that have been looking into it and studying it, and I ran across them. Robert Monroe was a huge help. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He wrote a series of books, starting with Journeys Out of the Body, that he started having spontaneously. And he was a scientist, and established the Monroe Institute in Faber, Virginia, that was teaching people how to leave their body through use of sound and other techniques. And
so do you sense like a cord? Like some people talk about the silver cord that connects us to our body, or they come out through the back of the head, kind of. I mean, I haven't had the out-of-body experiences. I had a roommate that used to have them. But it's just, I'm in my body. It's what it is.
Yeah.
But I'm curious about that. I would love to actually try it, to experience it, but it just hasn't happened.
Yeah. Well, don't die.
Okay, well, I'm looking forward to dying, but not yet. I got plenty to do until then.
Yeah, there are drugs that'll give you that experience. And I found some of those when I was researching it and tried them and got some experience from that was really helpful, actually, because now I wasn't gripped with pain and anger over what was happening. I was more lucid, just taking it in and communicating. And then eventually I realized that the reason that we are as focused as we are on the body and through the body, through its senses, is that if we aren't, then the body is not going to last long. Because the body is mostly water.
Right.
And what we really are is mostly fire.
Oh, because of oxygen and...
Not fire in that sense. Fire is in a more ethereal sense. Fire, a fiery being, an immortal.
Oh, because we're light beings,
right.
So that's like the sun.
And when we're in the body, we're amnesic. You know, we have to shut down in order to engage through this interface with the nervous system and the sensory system and all the other systems that put together make up the physical organism. And it's not in our instinctive behavior as light beings to act as this thing.
Right.
So we sort of go to sleep. And I watched it happen with my children because prior to their birth, I had contact with them and communicated with them, in particular one. But all three of them, my children, to some extent, palpably and verifiably. And I watched how, prior to their birth, I had lots of talk with this one in particular. And then after she was born, I thought, oh, well, that was wild, and now it's a new chapter, and she's a human being, and she's in her body. But then I'm at work after a month off, staying with her all the time, and she popped into my space at work, and in my mind. I'm like, she said, hello, and I said, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be in your body. She goes, it's sleeping, silly. I said, oh, and my wife called. We, chatted briefly, and then she was off again. And I'm trying to do my work there, and my wife calls later, and she says, "Baby just went to sleep 20 minutes ago or something." I said, "I know. She told me." And so we, over the next period of time until we were satisfied, when she slept, my wife would note the time, and when she showed up with me, I would note the time, and it always matched. And my wife's sensitive too. We would be driving in the car sometimes and feel her just suddenly there in the psychic space, alert and communicative, and look back and she just, body just gone down. So that was interesting. Over the next year or so, it happened a lot. And then as she learned physical or human language and started interacting more as a human being with us directly, she never remembered anything that happened on the other side through that communication. There was never any sense of that. And then I began to see this human personality emerge that was distinct from the being's, my sense of the personality before. And I realized, oh, it may be a little oversimplifying.
Right.
But what I was getting was that when the body's awake, the other being sleeps.
Okay.
And when the body goes to sleep, the other being has the opportunity, not always taken, to wake up and do its thing. Sometimes it just sleeps and processes,
right,
in a dream world. But in fact, I think that's more often the case.
Right.
But that's what I realized. That's what I was being shown.
So does that give you comfort?
I was actually disappointing at first.
Okay.
You know, I thought, this is really cool. Now I have these children in my life that I can, you know, have this dual experience with.
Right.
And then nurturing the animal that this body is, reaches out and nurtures the animal body that this other being is, and I realized I have to let them be what they came in with a track, just like mine. They have this plan that they're unfolding, and my job is to support that the way I've been supported, and their dual identity will become clearer to them if that's what is on this timeline for them.
Right.
You know.
Well, and I've always believed in reincarnation. Ever since I was a child, it seemed like, of course. I mean, it just seems so natural. But the thing is, even though I may have been this person in a past life, that's not who I am to this life. Because each human experience is its own distinct, discrete experience. And the personality that emerges in this marriage between our light being self and our animal self creates a unique entity each time, and yet we're all of them. It's
like a role-playing game.
Well, I think that's kind of why we do it.
Yeah.
I mean, think about play. Play is universal. All animals play.
They sure do.
So, I mean, it's just, what's more fun than playing, right? I play music. And so I think that sometimes we're just playing it, having a human experience, because, wow, this is it's like an amazing video game, super immersive.
Yeah.
And if we're talking about our lives extending beyond comprehension, then what is one human life?
Exactly. It's a drop in a bucket of experience. That's somebody else's quote. I forget who. But that's what I remember. A drop in an ocean of experience. And what really helped me get a grip on it, or a sense of it, was these modern games that people play with role-playing games. Where, okay, I'm a wood elf.
Right.
That's one of my daughter's favorite in D&D. Go, okay, well, I don't know what that is exactly, but I know that there's this pantheon, not pantheon necessarily, but this wide range of characters that you can be, and that's your avatar.
Right.
And if you were able to go into that game and say, well, and maybe you get assigned, you're a dwarf. Well,
right.
I don't want to be a dwarf. You know, that's
next
really
game
me,
you can pick your own, be a cleric or
yeah,
a ranger.
Exactly.
Or
yeah.
Right.
You know, but whatever it is, it has a certain set of attributes, and it takes a while to learn how to function effectively and efficiently through those attributes.
Right.
And in order to do that, you have to focus in and be that to some extent, and then you forget. You think you are that.
That's right. It becomes so immersive.
Right.
And what's more immersive than our own experiences? The thing is there's the collective experience and there's the individual experience. And the collective experience, there's like a gravity to it that influences all of our individual experiences. And it's almost like there's a struggle between the light and the dark, in which case there shouldn't be any struggle at all, because they both are part of the whole. And so I think in a way we create division because that's more dramatic. It captures our attention. It's something that's more interesting than just like la-di-da-di-da all the time.
Yeah, I get that. You know, one of my old girlfriends used to say about her ex-husband, she said, the difference between us is that I think of this world, of this experience, as a temple.
Right.
You know, to grow through, to school. He thinks of it as an amusement park.
Right. And both are right.
Yeah, that's the track. You know, sooner or later you get off the merry-go-round and go, there must be something more.
Right.
And
well, anyway, but we don't have much more here because we've run out of time. But we always do eventually, right?
Yeah.
Brice, thank you so much for coming on. This is fascinating.
Sure. Thank you.
I'm Drew Hutchison, and you've been tuned to Local Bias. We come to you from Greenfield Community Television Studio at 393 Main Street. My guest has been Brice Wilson, and thank you for joining us. The conversation explains itself, so watch it again if you don't understand. Take care.
Yeah, thank you.